All right. So as people continue to trickle in a little bit, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome you all to PARC Forum. My name is Marcus Larsson. I'm the Vice President of Global Business Development here at PARC and been here for 10 years. And we've been hosting these invited speaker forums for a good 42 years. I just looked this up this before walking in here, where we invite some of the most prominent scientists, innovators, and luminaries in the world to exchange ideas and have a dialogue about innovation and the future of technology and other things. And I'm particularly excited to introduce today's forum speaker. And the reason that I'm excited is that we have at PARC for the last 2 decades run an open innovation business where we provide breakthrough technology and innovation to our partners in the startup, the corporate, and the government agency world in a wide range of technological areas like AI, IoT, digital manufacturing, and so on. And then what could be a better fit than to welcome the person who coined the phrase open innovation as a speaker this afternoon to the stage to discuss his new book, Open Innovation Results, Going Beyond the Hype and Getting Down to Business. And then followed by a fireside chat with our CEO, Tolga Kurtoglu. Now, before I introduce Henry, I want to do a couple of housekeeping notes. There will be a 10-minute Q&A session at the end of the after the fireside chat. So please hold your questions until then. After the Q&A session, there will be a short reception out in the auditorium lobby where there will be some refreshments for you all to enjoy while you network and discuss today's program content. And also feel free to post on social media, take photos, use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever's your social media platform of choice, TikTok maybe for some, no? And while you do, please use the hashtag PARC Forum and the hashtag Open Innovation as you do. Now, to introduce today's speaker, Henry Chesbrough is Faculty Director of the Garwood Center for Corporate Innovation within the Institute of Business Innovation at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. Previously, he was an assistant professor of business administration and the class of 1961 fellow at the Harvard Business School. He holds a PhD in business administration from the University of California, Berkeley, an MBA from Stanford University, and a BA from Yale University, summa cum laude. His research focuses on managing technology and innovation. He's known as the father of open innovation, again, good place to be for that, due to his first book, Open Innovation. This book was named a best business book by Strategy and Business Magazine and the best book of innovation on NPR's All Things Considered. Scientific American magazine named him one of the top 50 technology business leaders in recognition of his research on industrial innovation. So please join me in welcoming Henry Chesbrough onto the stage.
Marcus, thank you very much. I do have a clicker, don't I? Wonderful. All right, so I'm not tethered to the podium. That's wonderful. I'm really happy to be here with you. I was actually here at PARC this past spring as well with Tolga and some wonderful colleagues and enjoyed that very much. But more to the talk we're going to have now, I actually gave the first public presentation of open innovation here in the George Paik Auditorium in April of 2003. And that was based in part on some research I'd done at Xerox PARC back in 1988 and 1998 and 99, so 20 years ago now. And I had a chance to spend part of the afternoon getting a little bit of an update on some of the things going on here. So it's really been wonderful and coming full circle for me. So really thrilled to be here with you. I'm going to present really 2 chapters out of this book, and my goal shamelessly is to get you to read the rest of it in hopes that the first 2 chapters might motivate you. So this is kind of the very big picture punchline, and then I'm going to kind of build up to why I'm arguing this, that I think for those of us who study innovation and for those of us here at PARC that are practicing innovation, we often focus a lot on the beginning stages of it, the generation of it. Nothing wrong with that. But if we're going to actually get results, we actually have to think more broadly about also the dissemination of the things that we generate and the absorption of it. And it's these three facets that we have to address if we're going to genuinely get value out of this. And to motivate it, I thought I would start with something that I think of as kind of a paradox. Many of us here in Silicon Valley have been noticing that technology and the rate of technical progress, by many measures, is actually accelerating, getting faster. Moore's Law is one of the many measures that is often put forward in support of this. And if you think about the lifespan of Fortune 500 companies, it's getting shorter and shorter over time, which suggests more and more turbulence and upheaval and growth, etc. So it seems like this very powerful, dynamic environment. Meanwhile, if we look at the growth in economic productivity, not only is it not accelerating, as I'll show you in a minute, it's actually slowing down. And if we look at wages, wages aren't even keeping up with productivity. So this is the paradox. We see technology advancing, but as a society and as an economy, we don't seem to be advancing, hence the paradox. So here's one of the charts from our friends at Singularity University, and they've cleverly gone all the way back to the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and this is a log scale. And notice that on a log scale, this thing is curving upward. So that means that things are indeed kind of accelerating. And this is one of many measures. And sometimes this means in the early stages, we as humans think not much is happening because it takes a while for these things to build momentum. And then there comes a point where it really starts to take off, and wow, it's just incredible what's happening. And so all of this, while we're thinking things are moving more or less linearly, all of this is happening. And this, to me, promises abundance, that we'll just have lots and lots of whatever it is the technology is delivering to us. Well, so where is it? I'm showing you here U.S. total factor business productivity going back to the post-World War II period. So this is more than a 70-year view, and this is on a linear scale, not on a log scale. And as you can see, the number is actually slowing down rather than trending up. So we're not seeing it there. If we look across the G7 countries, across different decades, although there's some variation here, the productivity rate is going down across all of the G7 countries, so the US is not an outlier in this regard. And if this is one I think is maybe a little bit more sad. I'm the father of 2 children, and I suspect, looking at the audience, many of you have children as well. What this chart is showing us is, depending on the decade of your birth, the growth in GDP per year is slowing down. So those of us who were the baby boomers, we had a pretty big, healthy tailwind behind us in terms of the economic growth during our economic lives, growing more than 2.5% per year on average. Meanwhile, the people that are coming out in the millennials and whatever, is it Gen Alpha now that we're up to? Things are slowing way down. And in some of the public interest survey research that's done by places like the Pew Charitable Trust, they're showing that for the first time in decades, most American families think their children will not have a life as good as they did. And for those of us who are old enough, this is really quite a change from the way it used to be for generations before. So all of this is to say we have exponential improvement in technology, but a slowdown in productivity. And then we get to wages. And now I'm showing you a chart that shows that wages aren't even keeping up with the slowing down of productivity. And of course, you don't get to eat productivity, you get to eat wages. And so it's even worse in that regard. And that gets us into some other territory I don't really want to talk about tonight, about how much of the economy is going to labor versus capital and so on. But this, I think, shows that we're not seeing abundance, whether it's in productivity or wages. So what's going on here? There are people who've been thinking about this. I'm not the first person to notice this trend. And some people think it's a measurement problem. And actually, the exponential technology stuff, it's real. It's happening. And good news, we just haven't figured out how to measure it yet. Which suggests, don't worry, it's going to be okay. The measures will catch up and all the rest. Now, I tried to show you a pretty long time frame. And so even if we accept that there are some measurement issues, I personally find it's a little too convenient to put all of it on measurement. And for those of you who read economic historians like Robert Gordon, who've studied productivity over a couple of hundred years, Robert Gordon and others think, no, there is something else here that in the digital world that isn't as life-changing as the first and second industrial revolutions and the savings, labor savings of the innovations that came out of those periods. I'm going to say more about these other ones, so I'll just briefly note them here. One thing I think is happening is that we're seeing a growing separation from the best and the rest. And that's one of the reasons for focusing not only on generation, but also dissemination and absorption. I think we're seeing a growing gap there. And then I think the real solution, and what I'm really focusing on in the book, is a call to kind of renew our investment in our innovation infrastructure. And that we're really living off of investments that we've made decades ago, and until we kind of get back in the business of rejuvenating that, this is going to continue. So one thing that I suspect many of you do know, but in case you didn't, I wanted you to see it, is we are not investing as much as a society in our future as we used to. And so this productivity slowdown I'm showing you, it's not terribly surprising when you see this kind of a trend. We're just not, and it's funny, the Congress goes through this interesting ballet every year or two where they'll authorize a pretty healthy boost in federal research funding, 50%, in a few years as much as 100% increase at the authorization stage. But for those of us who study these things, the money only gets spent when we get to the appropriations. And when it comes time for the appropriations, that 50 and 100% gets whacked and whacked hard. And it generally comes down to create this kind of a trend here. So I mentioned before this idea of the best versus the rest. These are data from the OECD, the top 40 economies in the world. And it shows in manufacturing and services the growing gap since 2000 between the people that are the best in that sector versus the ones that are falling behind. And what you can see is a growing gap in both manufacturing and in services. And this is even more pronounced in the ICT, information communications technologies, where the frontier firms are really up ahead, sometimes a factor of 2 over the laggards. And it's particularly concentrated in ICT compared to other business services. And so the way I interpret this, the exponential technology story is real, and it is happening, but it's mostly happening at those frontier firms. And most of the rest of us aren't keeping up. We talked this afternoon about artificial intelligence in a number of the discussions I've had. There are a few companies that are already doing amazing things with artificial intelligence. But the vast majority of companies can barely spell it, and certainly haven't mobilized their data to train their algorithms to be actually putting it to work. So that's just one small example of this gap I'm seeing between the best and the rest. And so I think when we think about average productivity, average wages, it's not the very, very, very best firms that drive that. It's the average firms that are driving that. And we're not keeping up. We're falling further behind. Yeah, it's a little funky. I'm sorry about this. This is from the OECD, and it's looking at their, MFPR, I've defined this in the book, but I didn't bring it with me. They're trying to do it across different industry groups. And the services don't include the financial services area. But I think the way I look at this is productivity improvement of more than 80% over this interval here for the top firms versus a very modest improvement in productivity for the lagging firms, is the way that I'm interpreting that. Yeah, thanks. Chances are other people had the same question. So let's turn this question around. If we're trying to understand this exponential paradox, why is it that technology is advancing but productivity and wages aren't? What if we turned it the other way around? There was a time when productivity was advancing pretty well. What was going on then? And what's changed? So same data, but looking at the other end of the telescope. And one thing to think about is the infrastructure investments that we made in the post-war period. And there was a whole book written about this by Tom Friedman and his colleague Michael Mandelbaum, That Used to Be Us. And some of the things that are in the infrastructure investments we made are almost amazing to think about now. In 1944, we had the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, which was more commonly known as the GI Bill. And this was a radical idea that we have all these people, millions of people, mobilized to fight the war. By 1944, it was pretty clear how it was going to turn out. And the Congress actually said, what do we do with all these millions of people, young men who know how to use weapons, and there aren't going to be enough jobs for them? What do we do? Let's pay for them to go to college. That's what they did. They literally funded millions and millions of dollars for the very first time and made a massive infusion into the higher education system of millions of people. And this is a huge boost to the human capital of the society, and it greatly allows your ability to increase your productivity. So we did that. Within 10 years, we created something called the federal highway system, the so-called interstate highways that we have now. And this was, again, a massive build-out of highway infrastructure, and it allowed businesses in many different parts of the country to be much more effective in logistics and transportation and what have you. Another massive infusion of the infrastructure for the country, and it greatly spurred the growth of business. In the 1960s, particularly after Sputnik was launched in 1957, yes, we panicked about Sputnik, and there were a lot of military responses we had to that, but we had a number of non-military responses as well that had the effect of, again, boosting our innovation potential as a society, particularly in the higher education systems. So we had not only big increases in the natural and physical sciences, but also in the social sciences as well. And so all of this contributed to that productivity growth that was actually doing very, very well from the post-war period through the late 70s around till about 1980. So these are things that we used to do. And if I think about, look around today, one of the things I wondered is, I'm old enough to remember when you got out of college, most of the places that hired you would put you into a training program. And you'd rotate through the company for 3, 6 months, sometimes as long as a year. And then after that period, you would then kind of go into whichever of those areas was most interesting for you. And companies thought this was a natural way to do business. And they thought it was quite natural and important and relevant to train their workforce. Now the students that I work with at Haas, they tell me that the companies that are hiring are looking for people who've basically already done the job. And they don't invest in training anymore. So that, again, hurts the infrastructure of the society. And then our support for science. I already showed you the R&D, the federal investment in R&D going down. But this is from an interesting document that was created in July toward the end of the Second World War by Vannevar Bush, no relation, who was the science director for Roosevelt in the Office of Science Research and Development. And from this document is the following quote: "Science can be effective in the national welfare only as a member of a team. Without scientific progress, however, no amount of achievement in other directions can ensure our health, prosperity, and security as a nation in the modern world. So it was a smart idea to invest in science, even if you're not fighting a war. So that was, I think, something that used to be widely shared. So now I'm going to make a bit of a shift and go back to open innovation. So far I've been talking about innovation infrastructure at a very general level, and I want to talk now about the impact of the financial crisis on open innovation. When I was talking about it here at PARC in 2003. In 2007 and 2008, when the financial crisis really gathered pace and hit us, open innovation was still a very new idea. And it's kind of a subtle idea. And so a lot of companies, when they heard about open innovation and the financial crisis hit, it saddens me to say it, but I think a number of these companies took open innovation as a rationale to cut their internal spending on R&D. Oh, we'll just be open. We'll get somebody else to do it, somebody else to pay for it. And in the short term, that will cut your spending. But what hurts you is when the markets come back, when the economy recovers, you've lost something in your own innovation infrastructure in your organization. And that you don't get back. And I think, unfortunately, this is one of the ways that open innovation has been misused by companies. I have some more examples in other chapters of the book on this if you want to pursue that. So what do we mean by open innovation? This is a long, single sentence, but I want to call out a few points. One is it's a distributed innovation model. It's not a vertically integrated model. It involves purposively managed inflows and outflows of knowledge across organizational boundaries for both pecuniary, if you want monetary or financial, and non-pecuniary reasons in line with the business model of the organization. So you can think of this as the antithesis to vertical integration. But it's collaborative, it's distributed, it's aligned with your business models. This is what we mean by open innovation. That also means it's not just open source. It's not just IP licensing. It's not just venture capital or user innovation. These are all elements of that definition, but it's all of them. It's not any one of them. And so again, when the financial crisis, I think people sort of seized on open innovation as an excuse to do things they wanted to do anyway that really weren't pro-innovation, but they used the label because it sounded, I mean, who could be against open innovation? So if we think about these three facets that I talked about earlier, let's look at them a little more closely. In the generation phase, if we contrast a vertically integrated or closed model where you have a lot of research activity that fits through to a single market, and in my interviews this afternoon we talked about the idea that the company paying for the lab was essentially a monopsony, a single buyer. And everything inside the R&D organization, all of it gets funneled through that company and its business and business model. That's the earlier model before open innovation. If we compare that to an organizational model where the knowledge flows are going across organizational boundaries and going from the outside in or the inside out, which of these is going to do a better job of generating, diffusing, and absorbing knowledge? And I think you can see quite easily that the open model has a lot of virtues. Not just in the generation stage, well, that's an important one, but also in the diffusion and absorption stages. More people get to look at it, more people get to try it, you get more shots on goal, so to speak. And as a society, there's more utilization of the knowledge. So if we're trying to boost productivity across the society, the open model has a lot to say for it. And one of the ways you can think of this is the lab is our world when we're in this closed model versus the world can be our lab in the open model. There's a lot of evidence, and I don't have time here to go through it all with you, but I can say to you with a straight face that if you define it properly and put good processes in place to manage it, it works. It actually does good stuff. It is not a silver bullet. It does not work everywhere all the time. If you use it to cut all of your internal R&D in the name of open innovation, it ain't going to work very well for you later on. But there are lots of examples where it's helped a lot. And one I'll take a moment on is if we look at the pharmaceutical industry, 20 years ago, most of the big pharma companies got the vast majority of their compounds from their internal laboratories. And if you look at those same companies today, pretty much to every single company, with some exception for Genentech, pretty much everybody else, most of their compounds come from outside. And they might be inside by the end of the process, but they don't originate inside the R&D labs. Instead, they originate in academic medical centers, in focused pharma companies or technology spin-offs that come out of the academic medical centers and go into startup mode and then later get acquired. But there's a lot of evidence that open innovation really helps. So having said that it really does work, I would also go on to say that we haven't spent enough time, myself included, in looking at the limits and the barriers to when it might not work. And particularly if we want to think about diffusion and absorption, we really need to pay more attention to this. So we can think about open innovation in one way is greatly expanding the intake into an innovation process through all these wonderful mechanisms I listed to you earlier over here. Lots of things that are increasing the intake to the engine of innovation, if you will, that creates our proofs of concept, and then we take them out to the businesses where they get scaled up again. So that all sounds great, but if you haven't actually prepared the rest of the process for this rapid expansion of intake, instead of getting more innovation out the other side, you actually just get congestion. And in particular, the support functions in the organizations that have to support how we deal with and process all this new stuff coming in. If we haven't thought about and planned and put processes in place ahead of time, the support functions get literally overwhelmed. And they become huge friction points and roadblocks, which mean you aren't going to get much, if any, new innovation out the other end. So you've got to think about it as an end-to-end system, an open system, and you can't just think about the innovation group and the business units. You've got to think about these support organizations that have to be part of this journey as well. And too often we don't do that. Openness really helps in the dissemination of things. In the software world, we think about things like open code, open data, open APIs, really to reduce friction in moving knowledge. Also, this can help us overcome our internal silos, the internal boundaries we build inside of companies that actually mean one part of the organization doesn't truly know what the other part of the organization is doing, or they can't see it. It's not visible to them. Other things that really help are moving workers around. Instead of putting them in a particular functional group and having them spend their whole careers in that functional group, moving them across different functional areas and building relationships with people not just in one organization, in one function, but multiple organizations, multiple functions. And even for the university side, I think one thing that's happened is a lot of people now in universities are taking leaves of absence and going to work in companies, which I think is actually bringing some useful knowledge to the companies. But what I really like is when those people go back to their university jobs and they're now working with their young doctoral students for the next research projects. Those projects, I think, are better and more interesting and maybe more relevant after those experiences. And so having this mobility to go back and forth, if we want to move knowledge across organizational boundaries, even in this hyper-connected world, it really helps to move people. But ultimately, we've got to absorb it and put it to work. This, by the way, is one of the best reasons to hang on to your internal R&D. It actually helps you do a better job of evaluating, recognizing, working with the external stuff. Your purchasing organization can't do all this. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the training, they don't have the metrics, the processes to do it. You need strong internal researchers to really collaborate effectively with external researchers. So if you take nothing else away from my talk tonight. This alone is the reason why open innovation does not mean getting rid of your internal R&D. There's a wonderful story about this that we were talking before about the limits and barriers to open innovation. A student of Kareem Lakhani's at Harvard Business School, this woman, Hila Lifshitz-Asaf, did a wonderful study of open innovation at NASA. And she was a PhD student at the time, and because it was Harvard and they had a lot of funding, she was going from Harvard to the Johnson Space Control Center in Houston every 2 weeks for more than 2 years. And she was actually there when they launched their Open Innovation Initiative, which was actually a crowdsourcing initiative. So they didn't really define open innovation in the full sense that I'm sharing with you. But let's continue. And they got dozens of challenges they put out there, and they got thousands of responses from the people that they reached out to. And one of these that turned out to be a huge success for them was an algorithm to predict the incidence of solar flares. These are outbursts from the sun that create huge amounts of radiation. And you don't want to be outside of your spacecraft on a spacewalk during one of these. And for that matter, your equipment needs to be shielded during these periods of time. So you really want to know when the solar flares are going to happen. And it turned out that through the data they provided and the people that looked at the data and proposed algorithms, they found one that had a much longer prediction window and a much higher accuracy. So 2 good attributes to improve on, and both of these were big improvements. So you could have stopped the paper right there and said, voila, open innovation works. But because they had resources and funding, and Hila kept going to Johnson Space Control Center after this was received. And what she found was fascinating, that back at Johnson Space Control Center, once this much better algorithm was received, validated, and awarded, and all this publicity and recognition for the person who proposed it, who, by the way, was a weather forecaster, not somebody who studied aeronautics or aerospace, none of that stuff. The people inside of NASA had an identity crisis. Wait a minute. I went to NASA because it is rocket science. It is hard. It is interesting. I want to be part of solving these problems, and instead I'm validating something from a weather forecaster? You know, what's my role here if that's what I'm doing? And I think it shows the very human result that can happen from open innovation, particularly if you define it too narrowly and you don't take this system view, is it ends up feeling like outsourcing. Now, NASA, I think, handled it well and was able to convince most of their technical staff that really what we're doing is we are seeking the solutions that man needs to be in space. And it's up to us at NASA to be the seekers of the solutions and also to get them to work. Because the people who propose these ideas, they're not the ones that are going to implement it. So it's really on us to do this. But it is a reframing that you need to go through. And I think this is one of the challenges to generalize that many of us confront with open innovation is we need to think hard about how we manage the internal technical staff that we have when we're bringing this in. A different barrier that I think open innovation runs into is a disconnect that can arise between the innovation front-end units of businesses and the back-end business units that have most of the budget, the P&L responsibility, et cetera. And the innovation units are off looking at the latest new shiny objects and all that exponential technology I started my talk with, and reporting back all this cool stuff. Meanwhile, the business units are like, yeah, sure, right. Worse, I think there's a problem in the funding, where if you do come up with something that looks actually genuinely good, and in the middle of the fiscal year, you're handing this over to the business unit, the business units typically don't have a lot of slack in their budgets, and it's like they didn't know it was coming, and it looks like it's going to need some work before we can use it. Where's that money going to come from? And by the way, what people are going to work on that? because our team's already pretty fully allocated. So one answer to this came from Intel, which was thinking about both the money side of this and the people side of this. They had an innovation group that they called New Business Initiatives, and they were looking at things like wearable technology, for example. This is a few years ago now. And what they did was they created a special pool of money to provide funding for those handoffs during the fiscal year where the business unit didn't know to budget for it, doesn't have any funding, but instead of waiting for the next fiscal year to start before any funding can occur, they provided a pool of money to manage that transition. And the rule is you can't touch that budget for other things. So this takes some discipline to make this work. You can't rate it for all the other things you might want to put on it. And then the other thing they did is on the people side, they seconded one of the project team to the business unit for the next 6 months so that the various questions that arise when you're trying to work with this project, you don't necessarily know on day one what all those things are going to be. Meanwhile, the team is broken up and redeployed on new projects, and so you can't really put Humpty Dumpty back together to answer all these questions. But by putting somebody on that project for another 6 months, well, they were there. Either they did it themselves or they know who did it. And then you can recover. So we need to address all of these aspects to deal with open innovation. So to summarize, yes, you want to widen the intake and get more eyes on the problem. Yes, you'll find unusual sources and you can find lots of useful knowledge provided we think about the downstream capacity and the support resources, et cetera. We do need to open up more and reduce friction to move this knowledge, which also means moving people. And we need to think about the absorption. We need to train. We've got to actually complete the solution. We've got to either align with the business units and their business model or find a new business model to do all this. So the exponential story is really about knowledge generation, and we need to go further. We need to think about dissemination and absorption. We need to get back into the business of investing in innovation infrastructure. And inside firms, it's the same story. We also need to build and sustain innovation infrastructure inside our organizations. And so it's not really what we start in the generation phase that's going to determine these results. It's what we finish. So with that, the book's coming out in November. Thank you very much. And here's the way you can pre-order it today on Amazon. And we have our PARC Forum hashtag, our Open Innovation hashtag, and our pre-order URL. Thank you very much. So now Tolga's going to join me up front here, and we're going to have a little fireside chat.
Thank you, Henry.
And whatever you found interesting in this, and the things that I've learned this afternoon as well.
No, I think it was fascinating, first of all. It's always a pleasure to be in your company. So thanks for the talk. I'm certainly looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. But it is interesting, right? So taking sort of a historical perspective on this and going back to when we started off the open innovation business and the journey that we've had and all the lessons learned and kind of driving best practices as to how to help our clients and partners in open innovation. You kind of touched upon a lot of the challenges that we face.
Do you
on a daily
see,
basis.
you don't have to name names, but have you seen in some of your clients where they kind of misused open innovation to cut back on their internal R&D?
I don't think so. I mean,
So I just made that up.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That.
That's not what I'm saying. I'll phrase it a little bit differently, right? So it takes quite a bit of effort to make open innovation work. We look at a certain set of things to be in place as we engage with our clients and partners. We look for strategic alignment. Is it just a nice to have problem or a really strategic business problem that the company is facing? So that's really, really important. We also look very deeply into whether we can work collaboratively. I think one of the biggest challenges is I think people often underestimate how much collaboration it takes to make open innovation success. And by definition, you need collaboration. It's not something that you have full control over the resources and the assets and the people, etc. So it requires a great deal of kind of team chemistry and dynamics to be successful. So we look at those things, and then we also look at, quite frankly, their partners that really understand the spirit of open innovation. And I think what you alluded to perhaps is more common where that's misunderstood and thereby misused. So,
yeah, I think this idea of real collaborative open innovation means you have responsibility without complete end-to-end control.
Yeah.
And that's a scary place for a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you mean I have to share responsibility? I have to share control? I can't command and control every part of it myself.
Yeah.
And the answer is no, you don't get to do that, but look what you get in return.
Yes, yes. And that's precisely right. I think, there is a number of challenges. I mentioned the collaboration one, but typically there are two other major challenges when you engage with somebody that's kind of coming into the open innovation, trying to kind of experiment with it for the first time and whatnot. One is the famous "not invented here" syndrome, because
right,
I mean,
saw
if you
a
look
little
at
bit of that with NASA.
If you take PARC as an example, right? So you alluded with the NASA example. It's really fascinating, but all of our partners on the commercial side are companies that have orders of magnitude larger R&D footprints already at their disposal to go after their innovation portfolio and R&D and whatnot. So it's always an interesting and a tough dynamic in terms of, why do we need to partner? Can't we do it ourselves? We have the people and the money and whatnot. So that's there. And then the other one is also something you alluded to, which is the command and control. I think this notion of what I would call the old model is sort of what corporations gravitate towards if they don't have the full understanding of all the dynamics that you've talked about, the pace of change in technology. I would add another one to that, which is talent asymmetry. I mean, you can't have access to the kind of talent that you need at the time that you need it, etc. So there's a whole host of reasons why you might want to actually think about not doing it all yourself, but partnering with the right set of organizations and institutions and whatnot too. And sometimes that's not well understood because of the command and control. We want to own everything, we want to do everything, we want to control everything. So,
I do sense that every company that's got a strong internal R&D capability knows in their heart they can do it better.
yeah,
Maybe also cheaper. And let's say that they're right. You might still want to collaborate for a couple of reasons. One is you're often working with something where somebody's already done a lot of work that you can build on, and that's there today.
yeah,
You can then get started soon, maybe. Tell me what projects you're going to cancel to free up the resources that you'll use to do this. And then how soon can the work get started? Meanwhile, these people have already had a running start.
Yeah.
And you just build on what they've already got. So even if you can do it better, even if you can do it cheaper, you might still choose to collaborate in an open innovation fashion. So I think we have to think about the make versus buy choice in a broader context. And every strong technical organization I know is overcommitted. They have too much work going on today as it stands, so there isn't the internal capacity available to do the project right away without canceling a lot of stuff. And unfortunately, the same leaders that sign up to do the project often don't have the discipline to do the cancellations, and so therefore they become even more saturated.
Yes, definitely. So we see that as well. And the other piece of it is, again, you talked a little bit about sort of the front end versus the back end of it, right? So it's very, very important to really understand what it takes beyond sort of the discovery phase, beyond the research phase and whatnot. If you think about, again, we can do it better. Let's go with that. You may be absolutely right in terms of whether they can take on and do better on the kind of the science and the technology side, but that's only part of the journey, one of your major points, right, that you're trying to make. But it's not about just that. It's about the customer discovery. It's about understanding the market dynamics. It's about developing the right value proposition and the customer experience business model, and how to kind of bring all of those things together. And while you may have the technical resources that you need to be able to execute on sort of the research side of that, you may not have the other ones. Hence, another reason to partner with other people.
So one piece of good news I can share with this audience is that since the Open Innovation book came out in 2003, there actually, in my judgment, has been some genuine innovation in the area of how do we discover and validate new business models. And for those of you who follow Eric Ries and Alex Osterwalder and Steve Blank and the lean startup stuff, I think these people have actually made a genuine contribution to not only startups, but also to corporate innovation by giving us a methodology for exploring and testing multiple business models. When I was doing my research here at PARC back in the late 90s, PARC had wonderful technology, and if it fit with the copier and printer businesses, they actually had a pretty good track record of using it. But as many of you know, a lot of the projects that were going on here really didn't make copiers and printers faster, better, cheaper. And so they ended up going outside of PARC looking for different business models, and many of them, when they went outside, didn't find a business model outside either, but a few of them did and became publicly traded companies that we know and love today, whether it was 3Com or Adobe or Documentum or what have you.
Yep.
Today, we can do better. We actually now have, thanks to Eric Ries and Steve Blank and Alex Osterwalder, among others, we actually have some methodologies for you when you have some exciting new research discovery at PARC. If it doesn't fit with Mother Xerox, there's a lot of other stuff now we know to tell you to do that you can check out. And I actually met a group of people today that are doing it. So it really, I think, is an advance since the book came out, and one reason to perhaps be somewhat hopeful about all this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that observation is clearly what led to the realization that, there is sort of value creation and then value capture. That's another way that I frame it, right? And obviously the discovery, the invention part was fine, but under the purview of just one company, you don't have a much broader ecosystem with which you can actually explore those things. What was it? The world as our lab concept, right? So,
right.
And that's really what led to the spin-off of PARC from an independent R&D organization to becoming a business in open innovation, and certainly the journey that we've taken for the last 17 years or so.
I think we have time for a few questions from the audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah? So, and we have microphones, I think. Just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. And so we've got questions over here. Why don't you give me your question? I'll repeat it while we're waiting for the microphones.
Sure. I think you're concerned about big global issues like climate change, population, overshooting. It seems to me that the environment today is so different from what it was post-war. During the war, we had this reasons all come together and collaborate. We put racism aside, we put sexism aside, we all got together and did it, and then afterward, I think we managed to carry some of that forward for a while, but then people started to distrust government. Government was providing all this, as you mentioned, the GI Bill and highway program, and we had the FDR, with the WPA and so on. But then the 90s come along, and or Newt Gingrich, we got to get rid of government, the me generation, and with globalization, I think we're seeing a shrinking into narrow self-interest, and it's really inhibiting our ability to solve these big problems. But climate change could be another war that we could collaborate on. So I mean, how do you see open innovation moving outside traditional corporate profit motive to really help us address these big problems that we have? Thank you.
So I share the thesis of your question about retreating from a broader shared interest to a narrower self-interest. But my answer to your question is actually, I think, a hopeful one. Our students at Berkeley really care about climate change, about inequality, about a number of issues that are troubling the society. And even though they're studying in a business school, they actually want to use their skills to impact these issues. And so one of the classes I teach is called Organizational Moonshots, and we tie the organizational activities to one or more of the sustainability development goals. And the reason to do that for an organization is that unlocks new growth for the company. It turns out if you can provide clean, fresh water to an impacted community, other good things happen as a result of that, and you actually can get more business. And so by linking these, getting corporations to take more risk and thinking bigger, they do it not
Longer
just to be
term.
good corporations, but to actually create more growth for themselves. So this is the short answer to your question. And it turns out open innovation is a great technique to do that, because if you're going to make a dent on something like clean water, you're going to have to collaborate with a number of other organizations, whether you're Coca-Cola or Nestle or whomever. There was a question here, yeah.
Yeah, back in the 1980s, in the 1980s, I was familiar with some government programs called technology transfer.
Sure.
And I think it was pretty successful in those years, but is this kind of thing still going on?
So,
Thinking of NASA and the Bureau of Standards.
yeah. So partly yes and partly no. There was genuine appreciation in the defense sector for this. And one thing I would point out, since the late 50s, since Sputnik, DARPA has been around for 60 years. Now, we all think of the Pentagon and bureaucracy and very ossified procurement processes, and that's all true. But alongside that is this really interesting, very flexible, unstructured group of people that spend, I think in 2018 it was $3 billion, and they do none of the work internally. All of that money is programmed and spent outside, some of it being spent right here where we are right now. What I think is really cool about that is you've got, I think, 200 people at DARPA, 100 of whom are the program managers. So they're programming $3 billion across 100 program managers. That's $30 million per program manager on average. And they're spending all of that outside of DARPA. So they're looking everywhere they can across the country for where they can find pockets of great stuff that can be harnessed to a mission that serves the national interest. And in Republican and Democratic administrations for 60 years, we've kept this going. So some of the tech transfer programs have sunsetted, but programs like DARPA are alive and well and show every sign of continuing. And I think it is, amidst the slowdown and the lack of infrastructure investment we have, et cetera, these, I think, are beacons of light that really are hopeful. Question back over here.
Sean Carney, VMware, ex-PARC. Given what you know about the history of PARC and your intimate knowledge of PARC today, literally today, what would you tell Tolga as your one shining example of how PARC has succeeded with your method?
So could you all hear the question? Everybody heard it? Okay, so I got to spend a few hours this afternoon with 4 people from PARC, so naturally I am a complete expert on all things PARC today, which was part of the premise of the question. So, but in the spirit of the question, I think an observation I would make is that I think that since Xerox separated PARC as an independent laboratory organization, still serving Mother Xerox, but free to serve others as well, I see this as a promising model for other private research laboratories to partially address that problem I showed you of the federal R&D spending going down, What I didn't show you is a similar graph of corporate research spending is also trending down. And that means that the seed corn that fuels the society, within the universities, research funding is actually holding up pretty well. But we need more, and particularly if we're going to try to improve on some of these trends I was sharing with you, we need to find new business models for corporate research. How do we sustain it? How do we grow corporate research? And I think PARC provides at least a partial model for how you do that. Yes, you're aligned with the company and its strategy, but you aren't restricted only to serving that company. And when you find something from a DARPA program that can be useful, maybe not at Xerox, but maybe other places, you have the opportunity and an organization that will go out and look for those opportunities. As a society, that's what we want. We want more eyes on the problem. We want more people seeking ways to use this knowledge. And so we need to not only generate, we got to disseminate it, and we got to absorb it. So PARC is a model that I think can increase dissemination and potentially absorption as well as generation. So that would be my instant advice, Tolga, to you.
Thank you.
And it does raise a question, which is why aren't more companies doing this with their research laboratories? If this is such a good model, and I do believe it is, why did HP Labs shut down? Why didn't HP Labs take a path like this? And I don't mean to single out HP. We could think of a lot of other companies that have really cut back or even outright eliminated their research activities. Why not pursue a model like this instead, which is maybe more economically sustainable over time?
Actually, we are seeing more of that. I've been in a few meetings this year. Large corporation R&Ds are looking at PARC's model and see how they can embrace it.
So now what we need is a franchise system for PARC, just like McDonald's. And you teach them how to do it for the franchise fee, and then we can actually rejuvenate corporate research in America. How's that for a business?
That's
Great idea.
I think we should add.
Hi, I'm Ted Selker. I've worked in lots of research labs, and I've worked with lots of companies on innovation and invention. And I find technology transfer is not a done deal. Ownership is a real problem. And in fact, the record of research labs getting technology into companies is very, very bad. There are other reasons to have research labs that I have a good little list of them. But the actual act of making new companies within a company is very difficult because of the sizes of the revenues that are happening and the sizes of products that already exist. So I kind of wonder about this cheerleading for open innovation also because when I was at MIT Media Lab, I mean, trying to get these companies who were paying us to take technology, to take things that they said they wanted and was the holy grail, and if we made it, it would be used, never really happens. And so I'm very cynical about external forces helping companies change. That just, I don't know. Please.
Well, I hear your point about my cheerleading, and I take it in the spirit that you mean it. I hope I was clear about some of the limitations and problems as well. But I guess I am still somewhat optimistic in the face of a lot of negative evidence. And part of it is because our students genuinely, they're fired up about this. They care about it. And that rubs off on me. I do see some pockets of things going on that I'm very excited about. I mentioned DARPA already about this, but there are some others that are going on. A program that's very small scale that I think addresses an important problem. There's an initiative at Berkeley called Cyclotron Road, and outside of CERN in Lausanne, there's a parallel initiative called Attract. And in both places, they're trying to solve a problem of a scientist who's developed a technology and thinks they might want to explore a commercial development of the technology, but isn't quite sure yet what to do, and the technology is at a pretty early stage, so no private investor is going to touch it yet. And so at Cyclotron Road, what they've gotten funding from the Department of Energy for is to provide 2 years of funding to the PI to explore the commercialization without taking any property rights on the innovation. And so they're trying to get a little further down the road to make it investable. Attract is a program outside of CERN where CERN's got massive technology there where the Large Hadron Collider was. And now they're completing their high energy experiments. So the good news is they've accomplished great stuff scientifically. Now what do? And so Attract is a program for, it's I think 17 million euros across 100 projects where, like Cyclotron Road, they're going to provide funding for the PIs to carry work forward to make it more mature and potentially investable without taking IP rights. Now, these are small programs at small scale, so I shouldn't get too excited, but I think they are speaking to some of the friction points in the system that are holding us back.
But those government programs are very different from how businesses run.
True, and both of them presume that private financing is going to step in and drive it forward at some point. This is actually an advantage we have over Europe, is that the early stage VC industry and angel investing industry here is pretty healthy, and in Europe, not so much.
So I would suggest that, I know there's more questions coming, but
we have a reception too,
we have
and
a
I'm not
reception
leaving,
time.
so I'm
Henry
happy
and
to
I
talk,
will be here for
happy
further
to talk
questions.
with you guys at the reception.
Let's do that, but please join me one more time thanking our speaker, Henry Chesbrough. And see you next time at the next PARC Forum. Thank you very much.
Don't forget the pre-order.